you to listen to a quote. It comes from a recent Newsweek article covering a conservative political event, and the speaker is activist Riley Gaines. Here is exactly what she said about the promise of modern feminism. She said, "It delivered emptiness. It sold women the lie that children are burdens, that family is a limitation, and that fulfillment comes from self-centered autonomy rather than self-giving love." Now, depending on your politics, you probably had an immediate visceral reaction to that statement. You either cheered it as a hard, necessary truth, or you recoiled from it, dismissing it as regressive propaganda designed to push women back into the kitchen. But today I want to ask you to put your political reflexes on pause. I want us to stop looking at this text through the lens of the current election cycle, at least here in the US. Instead, I want to look at this through the lens of the last 50,000 years of human history. Because if we strip away the modern partisan framing, what Gaines is articulating isn't just a conservative talking point. She's voicing a profound, agonizing friction that sits at the very center of the modern human experience. She's talking about the collision between the world we built and the brains we evolved with. To understand why that specific word, emptiness, resonates with millions of people, we have to confront something uncomfortable about ourselves. We have to admit that the individual is a very weird and very recent invention. For roughly 99% of human history, the concept of the autonomous self, the idea that you are a distinct entity defined by your own career goals, your own inner identity, and your own personal choices, simply did not exist. Anthropologists refer to the historical norm as the sociocentric self, or sometimes the relational self. In ancestral environments, you were not a free-floating atom. You were a node in a network. You were defined entirely by your relationships. You were the daughter of X, the mother of Y, a member of tribe Z. Your survival depended entirely on your submission to the group's needs. In that deep historical context, autonomy didn't mean freedom. Autonomy meant exile. It meant death. To be cut off from the self-giving love of the tribe was the ultimate punishment a human could endure. So when we hear a critique of self-centered autonomy, we're hearing the echo of an ancient survival mechanism. We've built a society that celebrates the atomic self, where we're encouraged to find meaning within our own achievements and internal validation. But our nervous systems are still wired for the sociocentric self. They're wired to seek safety in the collective. When we prioritize autonomy over obligation, a primitive part of our brain sounds an alarm. It registers that freedom as isolation and that isolation as danger. That's why the charge that modern life delivers emptiness lands so heavily. It's a description of anomie, a sociological term for the condition of disconnectedness. We gained the freedom to write our own stories, but we lost the comforting certainty of having a pre-written role in the tribe. But there's a second layer here, and it's deeply economic. We need to look closely at the idea where she says women were sold a lie that children are burdens. This is where the tension between biology and capitalism becomes undeniable. Here's the cold, hard truth of modern sociology. In a late-stage capitalist urban society, children are an economic burden. They cost a fortune in housing, food, and childcare, and they do not generate income for the household. In the strict calculus of the market, raising a child is a bad investment. But this is a new phenomenon. Before the Industrial Revolution, the home was the economy. It was a site of production. Men and women worked together, perhaps at different tasks, but in the same sphere to survive. Children were assets. They were farm labor, they were the workforce, and they were your old age insurance policy, right? Industrialization changed everything. It ripped work out of the home and put it into the factory. In the office, the home was stripped of its economic power, left only as a place of emotional consumption. This created a split that sociologists call separate spheres. The public sphere became the place of value, money, and status. The domestic sphere became the place of unpaid labor. And this is the crux of the conflict. The market tells us that worth is determined by income and autonomy. Biology tells us that worth is determined by lineage and connection. So when speeches like this occur, they're effectively a rebellion against the marketization of the human soul. When Gaines attempts to recenter motherhood and self-giving love, she's trying to override modern economic logic with an older evolutionary logic. She's arguing that the production of human connection, kinship, is superior to the production of capital. She's arguing against a world that only values things with a price tag. And if you disagree with her politics, you can likely feel the weight of that argument. We all feel the pressure of a world that demands we be productive employees first and human beings second. And finally, we have to look at the second part of the text, where the rhetoric gets much more intense. The article notes that the speakers attacked gender ideology, and transgender existence, sometimes calling it an evil lie from the pit of hell, often framing it through a creationist lens. Why this intensity? Why does this specific topic feel so apocalyptic to this group? It seems disproportionate if we just view it as a policy debate, but it makes perfect sense if we view it through the lens of anthropologist Mary Douglas and her concept of purity and danger. Douglas argued that societies maintain stability through strict categorization. We need clear boxes to understand reality: night and day, child and adult, man and woman. These categories act as the load-bearing walls of our cognitive home. When things fall between those categories, when they blur the lines, they're perceived not just as different, but as pollution, as dangerous. In the worldview that Gaines is defending, the categories of mother and father, biologically determined, are not just social roles. They are cosmology. They are the fundamental order of the universe. From a sociological perspective, when gender roles become fluid, it doesn't just feel like a political disagreement to this group. It feels like cosmological chaos, if you will. It feels like the pillars of the world are crumbling. The reference to the pit of hell isn't accidental. It's an expression of deep existential panic. It's the fear that if we remove these boundaries, reality itself will dissolve into disorder. This is the clash between a given world and a constructed world. In a given world, who you are is determined by nature, by God, by biology. It's fixed, and there's a comfort in that fixity, right? In a constructed world, who you are is determined by you. It's fluid, creative, and autonomous. To the modern progressive mind, that fluidity is liberation, right? It's the freedom to be your true self. But to the traditionalist mind, that fluidity is unmoored chaos. It's terrifying free fall with no ground to stand on. So when we look at a screenshot from Newsweek, it's very easy to dismiss it as just another salvo in the endless political shouting match. We're trained to pick a side, shout a slogan, and move on. But if you listen closely to the structure of the argument, the fear of autonomy, the valorization of the tribe over the self, the panic over blurred categories, you hear the echoes of a much older struggle. We're living through a massive sociological experiment. We're trying to reconcile our ancient kinship-craving brains with a modern, hyper-individualized, market-driven world. We're trying to find a way to be free without being alone. When someone says that modern autonomy feels like emptiness, they're not just playing politics. They're pointing to the ghost in the machine of modern life. They're highlighting the very real human cost of a society that has traded connection for freedom. The question we have to answer as a culture isn't about which political party wins the next election, right? The question is whether we can build a world that honors our need for autonomy without starving our need for belonging. Because right now, looking at the rhetoric on both sides, it's clear that we haven't figured that out just quite yet. You guys leave me something in the comments. Let me know what you think. Talk to you soon.